changing your frock, if you're moving to a new place in the facility, from a slaughter to a ready to eat portion of the plant. I really think there's been a, sort of a resurgence and a rethinking and a more focused application of those, getting back to the basics of sanitation and cleaning and personal hygiene.
Welcome to MeatsPad, a platform to share breakthrough knowledge that is accessible to the entire meat industry. Be ready to hear from meat specialists who will talk about numerous topics in meat science, including animal welfare, meat production, meat quality, and so much more.
Hello folks, welcome to the MeatsPad podcast. My name is Francisco Najar. Today it's a pleasure to have Nelson Gaydos. He's an outreach specialist at the American Association of Meat Processors. Welcome, Nelson. Thank you for accepting the invitation to be on this podcast. Welcome. How are you today?
Good morning. And thank you for having me again. My name is Nelson Gaydos. I am the outreach specialist with the American Association of Meat Processors. I have been in this position since the summer of 2016. A little bit of background about myself. I did both my bachelor's and master's at Penn State University in food science and meat science and microbiology, respectively.
Today we have a very special episode because we will be touching on some of the challenges that meat processors are facing when it comes to those practices that have to be established within the processing facilities to try to mitigate COVID-19 infections. But before we start off with our conversation, what does AAMP do? And please tell us a little bit about that and what's your role as an outreach specialist working for AAMP?
My job here at AAMP as outreach specialist, the main position is concerning questions and finding answers to meat processors. Briefly, AAMP is North America's largest meat trade organization. We focus on being an association for small and medium-sized meat processors all around the country. And my position as outreach specialist concerns, the main job is concerning answering questions of members, everything related to HACCP, to food safety, and more recently, dealing with this pandemic and COVID-19 and how meat processors are responding to that. Additionally, I also head up AAMP's internship program and work on writing articles for our weekly emails that go out, our monthly newsletter, and working on creating training materials and educational videos for our membership.
Good. This is very interesting. And so today we'll talk a little bit about, we saw that since March, since all this pandemic started, we saw that small meat processing facilities saw an increase within their sales. So if they were slaughtering 20 head cattle a week, the customers were demanding more beef and pork locally, so they were slaughtering more animals. I mean, they have more demand. We'll touch on this in the next episode about some of those challenges that they have faced. From your perspective, how has the COVID-19 pandemic affected people at the meat processing level?
Sure. I'd say overall, the pandemic has really exposed kind of some of the shortcomings in the meat industry. There is if you can kind of picture the meat industry, it's almost like a very large bottleneck where a lot of the slaughtering occurs in large facilities, or I should say, a lot of the animals that feed into the meat industry are distributed over a wide area and a large number of farms. But then those animals are pushed through and slaughtered in just a small number of facilities in the country and then distributed out again, kind of referring to that bottleneck shape I was talking about. And I really think that this pandemic has more or less expose that shape of the industry and some of the shortcomings of having such a large number of animals going through such a small number of facilities. And, personally for AMP and for our membership, this pandemic has really kind of brought people's attention back to the smaller, the local meat processors. So those businesses, and especially those that are doing their own slaughtering, have really been doing well in this pandemic. I don't want to make light of the pandemic and its effect on, the economy and everything that's been involved with that. But more or less, it's been very good for our membership and the smaller meat processor overall.
Good. I think that's very accurate in terms of the bottleneck that you mentioned. If you look at how many companies slaughter all the animals in the U.S., there are a handful of them. But one thing that I wanted to touch on today, as far as AMP and all the structure and all those trainings that you guys provide to the meat industry, has anything from that perspective changed due to the pandemic? In terms of maybe shifting the way we produce meat, in terms of the good manufacturing practices?
Sure. Maybe to answer your question, I'd kind of do a twofold answer. I'd say first, I believe that employees and business owners are really reflecting back on the GMPs that are already established. The very simple things of washing your hands, changing your frock if you're moving to a new place in the facility, from a slaughter to a ready-to-eat portion of the plant. I really think there's been a sort of a resurgence and a rethinking and a more focused application of those, getting back to the basics of sanitation and cleaning and personal hygiene. But as a second part of that answer, I think that this could be sort of the new normal. Maybe as time goes on, restrictions and the GMPs that are being applied here, as far as staggering the shifts of employees, the strict changes that have occurred in the breaking rooms and the gathering areas for employees. I think maybe we'll see some of those relax over time, but I also see those still being applied in some aspect. So, the meat industry and GMPs and the food industry, as it was a few months ago at the beginning of 2020, I think what has changed here is going to become the new normal. And how strict or how relaxed that new normal is will be dictated as, the next couple months of how COVID-19 hopefully dissipates as time goes on.
The Niche Meat Processor Assistance Network, or NPAN, is a proud sponsor of the MeatsPad podcast. We are a university extension-based community of practice of people and organizations helping small meat processors thrive. During the coronavirus pandemic, we offer the following new resources for meat processors and producers: a regularly updated COVID-19 resource page, and for meat producers to learn more about meat marketing, bi-weekly office hours via Zoom for those looking to open a new meat processing plant, translating more of our resources into Spanish. To learn more, visit www.nichemeatprocessing.org.
Would you tell us about one experience that you encountered that made you become a better person? That you learned from it, and just tell us a little bit about that, and so our audience can get to know you a little bit better.
Sure, I'd be happy to share. Some of the listening audience may know me already, and if they do, then they know that I make a few mistakes from time to time. But one that really sticks out in my mind was beginning my master's project at Penn State. So to back up a little bit, there's a process called enrichment, where if you are trying to test to see if a bacteria is present or not in a sample, you do what's called an enrichment, where you give the bacteria a lot of vitamins and nutrients that the bacteria can use to reproduce, and you try to make the environment better suited for the bacteria to grow. And by doing that, you can see if the bacteria is still present or not in the sample you're taking. So I had finished my first rep. The project was a pickled sausage project where I was looking to destroy Salmonella, Staphylococcus aureus, and Listeria. And at the end of my sampling, I was doing enrichments to see if the bacteria was destroyed or not. Well, I had completely messed up the formula for creating the enrichment for those bacteria, so I pretty much had to scrap that whole rep. And I was really frustrated. I was really angry at myself for a day or two. And my advisor, Dr. Campbell, he pulled me aside and was just, he was very understanding, and just was like, you know what, just learn from it. Dust yourself off, we'll get back in the lab and just learn from it. And from that, I learned a lesson of, you can learn a lot from your successes, but you can learn even more from your mistakes. So I think it's just important that you can learn from your mistakes. And like I said, this can be applied to a lot of things in life and in business and in meat processing, where, take chances, try to do something new, but also don't be afraid to do something new if you fail, because that's just a really, really great opportunity to learn something.
Do you think AAMP will be providing some training on that and some of the new regulations that may arise from all this situation?
Yes, we are working on some applications in that sense with training materials, some guidance documents, perhaps bolstering the amount of training and educational videos we have. So yes, I definitely see this pandemic and COVID-19 calling for a need for those kinds of resources for our membership and for the meat industry as a whole. I have an answer yesterday and this morning, and the AMP website has a pretty extensive resources page that you can just access on the main page. You don't have to be an actual member of AMP to view this information. It's kind of just a collection of all the relevant information we've come across over the past several weeks.
All right, and we have seen an increased demand of certain meat products. Again, moving that demand shifting towards a smaller, medium size part processors, butcher shops, and all that. Have you guys seen this too from your perspective?
Yes, we have. I'd say in general, a lot of the demand has fallen back to what I'd say are some of the more simple products, ground beef, ground pork, chicken breasts, those sort of kind of staple meat products for recipes. Those items that can be applied to a lot of different recipes, I think have really seen an increased demand since the beginning of the pandemic. But I'd also say that a lot of, it being summer and the grilling season coming up, that a lot of demand for those staple items, steaks, anything that people would be grilling, especially this time of year, have also seen a huge uptick in demand.
Reiterating that there's no evidence that this can be transmitted through food,
Mm-hmm.
and how are we adjusting to this?
Sure. I'd say when it comes to GMPs and personal hygiene and really limiting the spread of, not just COVID-19, but really all microorganisms in a meat processing facility, the person-to-person contact and the person to a surface, potentially spreading to another person is the real focus here. And, like I said, with the kind of the staple GMPs of washing your hands and personal hygiene, those have come back into the light as well. So if anything, I don't want I would just want to say that, this pandemic has really kind of shined a light back on those basic principles of GMPs and personal hygiene, and really brought that to the forefront of people's attention and focus. And hopefully the employees, understand a bit more of why they're doing the things they're doing concerning GMPs and personal hygiene, not just do it because, you've been told to do it. You're doing it because it's decreasing the potential spread of a microorganism to your other employees or to food contact surfaces.
Okay, so all this shift is more towards, okay, how can we prevent or minimize the actual transmission or infection of COVID-19 in our facilities? And I think this is very important because a lot of times we're seeing that, okay, we're putting more restrictions on how we produce safe meat, and people may think that, okay, we're doing this because COVID-19 may be transmitted through food, but we're doing it to prevent that transmission of that COVID in our facilities, and that's very important to highlight. Like you think about a processing line, you have meat cutters that are probably half feet away from each other. I mean, they're basically shoulder to shoulder. So what is the trend that we're gonna start seeing more in this coming years in terms of, okay, how we can do to prevent COVID-19?
Sure. I think maybe I'll take a different answer to this, but maybe a less scientific answer, but more of just a better relationship and better communication between business owners and their employees, and that trust of, if an employee does not feel well, then make sure that they're not put in a position where they absolutely have to come to work, because that doesn't just encompass the potential spread of COVID-19, but that's just really, any sort of illness, just the common cold, the flu, anything like that. We want to try and prevent any sort of spread of any sort of microorganism between employees who are working in close quarters. So I'd like to see that mentality of you have to go to work even if you're sick really dissipate in the coming years, in the coming months.
And I agree. I think that trust that you have to build, especially that owner-employee relationship, and focus more, because we're seeing this switch to small or medium-sized pork or beef processors that may have maybe 15 or 20, 30 employees that are very small. We're going to start talking about their slaughter capacity. So they're moving towards, okay, we used to kill 20 head of cattle a week, and now because we have more demand, we're killing twice as much. We're killing 40, 45 head a week. So that means down the road, you need to have more workforce there. So that's, if you think about it, you have to process more meat in the same space. That hence you're going to have potentially more people in the same room, and that relationship and communication, that's very important too. And thank you for pointing that out.
Sure. On AMP's main webpage, the main page, we have a COVID-19 business resources page, and it's really a large collection of information related to COVID-19 that we've gathered, throughout the meat industry. Includes updates from USDA, from the CDC, a few webinars, labor law news, guidance and directives from the industry, and a few of our own published materials as well. So just a really good collection of resources that a small meat processor would need in this time.
I typically ask one extra question, just not regarding about anything we talk about. For example, I asked Brandon about why do you need to be successful in the meat industry? I mean, what are some of the attributes that you think a meat scientist should have, especially now during this COVID-19 pandemic?
I'd say a necessary trait, and a trait that really, really relevant now in these times, is adaptability. Those businesses that are adapting to these changes, that are, increasing their capacity to slaughter, or developing new products, those that are beginning or increasing their online sales, that are doing delivery services, creating meal kits, those are the businesses that are thriving in this time. So yes, adaptability to changing situations, I think, is a very necessary trait in this industry.
Great. So what are some of the main differences between large and medium beef or pork processors when it comes to how they're producing, how they structure their production lines?
Sure. I would say the main difference would be the differences in the use of space. So, for example, in a smaller meat processing facility, all the breakdown of a side of beef or a side of pork could be done on just one table by maybe just one or two individuals. Whereas when you have a larger meat processing facility, that carcass is taken on a line over a much larger area and come in contact with and worked on by a much larger amount of people. And those people on those lines are, as we were talking about with the spacing and GMPs, those people are shoulder to shoulder most of the time. So a lot of the changes in response to this pandemic have been either spacing those employees apart or creating barriers to potentially reduce the spread of contamination of COVID-19 or any other microorganisms. So kind of getting back to the question, I would say the smaller meat processors and the smaller facilities have an advantage in that their employees perhaps are trained to do a larger variety of things instead of just a smaller number of things on a particular area of a carcass. So they can kind of go off on their own table with proper distance from their other employee and still accomplish the work that needs to be done.
Awesome. Thank you, Nelson, for being here today. I think this is all good, valuable information. I'm sure people out there may benefit from all the information you provided today. And thank you a lot.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right, folks, with this, we'll finalize this episode. Thank you for listening, and be ready to hear from more meat specialists in the following weeks. Stay tuned. Thank you.